Excellent. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Carissa Wengrovius, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us for the 12th webinar of the International Organization of Physiotherapists and Pediatrics, a specialty group of world physiotherapy. We're thrilled to have participants joining us from around the world today. The title of today's session is How to Succeed with the IOPTP Research Grant, New Guidelines, Procedures, and Lessons Learned for the 2026 round. We're honored to have two outstanding lead speakers on this topic, Dr. Kine Johansson from Sweden and Dr. Kirsten MacDonald from Australia. You'll see on your screen a link and QR code for today's webinar attendance form. Please take a moment now to complete this form. It's how we'll generate and send your certificate of attendance for continuing education purposes. We're also pleased to let you know that today's session is being recorded. The recording will be posted on our website and YouTube channel so you can rewatch or share with colleagues who couldn't attend live. All right, if you want to click to the next slide for me, please. All right, before we begin, we want to draw your attention to our copyright disclaimer. This material has been produced and communicated to you by or on behalf of the IOPTP. The material in this communication may be subject to copyright. Please refrain from copying or taking images or video footage of any material presented throughout this webinar. This helps protect the work of our presenters and ensures we can continue providing high-quality content to you. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Dr. MacDonald and Dr. Johansson. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Carissa. So hi, everyone. My name is Kirsten MacDonald. I'm one of the co-chairs of the IOPTP Research Committee. I'm a paediatric physiotherapy researcher and academic at Bond University in Australia. So it's an absolute pleasure to introduce you to our other speakers for this webinar as well, in addition to my co-chair, Kine, who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you about applying for the IOPTP Research Grant. So in addition to Kine Johansson, we have Stacey Juicing from the University of Southern California in the US, and also Kimberly Castle from Augustana University in the US. So together our panel represents 3 world physiotherapy regions, so we'll be able to hopefully provide you with a global perspective on applying for the IOPTP Research Grant. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide paediatric physiotherapy clinicians, educators and researchers with clear, practical guidance on the updated IOPTP Research Grant application process. So participants will gain insights from reviewers and past awardees, understand the new guidelines, avoid common pitfalls, and learn strategies for developing successful proposals. So there are 5 key learning objectives we hope participants will achieve by the end of this webinar. And just to let you know, in relation to the structure of the webinar, there are 2 main parts. So part 1 will provide an overview of the IOPTP Research Grant application process and updated guidelines. However, feedback from previous reviewers and awardees will also be shared. And part 2 will hopefully be a little bit more interactive with the opportunity to participate in small group discussion and a Q&A with the panel. So I'll hand over to Kine now, who would like to start the session by learning a little bit more about who you all are.
Yes, so welcome everybody. So nice to see you here, and we're happy that the day finally come that we can share our news about the new grant procedures. So before we start, we would love to get to know you a little bit better. So first, for a while, if you feel like it, we will be happy to see your faces for a little while, but could you also update your Zoom name and add the country, and you will find that on your profile picture. You will, on the top right corner, you will have the 3 dots, and if you click it on the last one below, you can change to rename. I think the thing was in English. In Swedish, it's byt namn, and then probably you have it in your own languages. So then maybe if you can change to your name and your country where you work. It's very helpful for us to see who's in the room. We have some from Europe, and some from North America, and one from Africa. Maybe two, if I guess and one from, I guess we have two from Asia as well.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. We also have some quick polls to get a sense of you guys and where you are in your research journey. So I will start them now. And the first poll is, now do you see the poll? Yes, good. The first question is about your primary professional role. Are you mainly a clinician, an educator, a researcher, or are you a mix? And just choose the option that fits you the best. So we have some combined, one educator and one researcher, no clinicians. So they hopefully can, or maybe the one that has the combination of both is a clinician. Could be. Good, I need to count how many we are. Okay, no, we have some more. I need to be patient, not my best skill. Okay, thank you. The next question, I'm a little bit, let me see. Can I share the results? Okay, I need to share the results. Carissa, if you're here, you can help me out as well because I got a little bit confused. Or maybe have you got two? You get all of them.
You are currently sharing the results, yes.
Yeah, but then you didn't have time to ask all the questions.
It looks like, yeah, it looks like you presented them all at once.
All at the same time.
Okay. Okay. No, now, okay. Well, let's see. Now you didn't have time to answer the other questions then. Oh yeah, you were fast. Okay, so a little technical difficulties there. So what you have asked is what your level of research of experience is, which also helps us a little bit to fit the content, and also you answered the last question if you are planning to apply for the research grant this year. And then I can share the results and so you know who we are in the room. So we have a mixture of being educated researcher combination, typically pediatric physiotherapists. Do you see I don't know what I'm sharing because I can't see it. Am I sharing everything or all three questions?
You are.
Okay. And we have the majority has some experience in research, and we have some people considering applying for the grant, and that is good.
Which is great.
Yeah, and it's also very important that you're here to listen to us talk about the grant, but it's also important that you inform your colleagues about the grant. So we're happy, even though you're not at the moment planning to apply, that you can tip your colleagues. Okay, I think it went really fast because I wasn't. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's really good to know. And this information just helps us also, I guess, cater a little bit of the information that we're speaking about today to the level of those who are in attendance. So we appreciate your engagement in that. So essentially the next section within the webinar is to sort of move on and actually discuss the IOPTP Research Grant in more detail. So we'd like to start by providing some background information about the structure of the IOPTP and the role of the research committee. So within the IOPTP, there are 5 integral members of the executive committee and also 5 key committees. So all speakers in our panel today are from the IOPTP Research Committee, which is the committee responsible for overseeing the annual IOPTP Research Grant. So the work of the IOPTP committees is guided by a strategic and operational plan with the latest version available on the website. So the vision of the IOPTP is to empower physiotherapists with an interest in paediatrics to provide effective physiotherapy services for children throughout the world. And one of the strategic priorities of the IOPTP is to advance paediatric practice by encouraging and supporting research and education to enhance evidence-informed and family-centred practice, promoting safe and effective outcomes for children and families globally. So one of the ways that the IOPTP addresses the strategic priority of advancing practice is through Goal 4 of the operational plan, which is to encourage scientific research and promote knowledge translation globally in the field of paediatric physiotherapy. And this is supported through administration of the annual IOPTP grant. So to date, the process for applying for the annual research grant has been outlined on the IOPTP website, which is found under the resources tab and within the research funding section. So a link to the research funding application form is provided, and applicants complete this and return the application form by the due date. So at present, it's that landing page of the website that is that kind of one-stop shop for all the information related to the grant. And that's just a highlight where you can normally see where the application funding form is. So, however, this year, one of the key activities of the research committee has been to review and refine the IOPTP research grant. So it's this new process that we would like to share with you today, and hopefully those who are watching this as well at a later date through the recording. So the first key change to the process has been to develop research grant application guidelines. So this is a single document that provides a central point of information to summarise all the relevant information for applicants. The other key advantage of these application guidelines is that it just provides more guidance to applicants about specific key information to include in each of the sections within the application form. And we wanted to, I guess, after reviewing previous rounds, we wanted to make sure that we were also, I guess, using this opportunity to provide those who are new to research or might be in the early stages of their research careers, just that little bit more guidance about what would constitute, I guess, more detailed reporting of their project plan. So the second key change has been an update to the actual research grant application form. So it's obviously has a new look to it for those of you who may have seen the previous one. So there's a new format and structure, and there's the capability to add, I guess, diagrams or references with more ease, because it's not apart from the first section, it's not within a template. So each of the key headings for each section are aligned to the guidelines. So hopefully that makes that process seamless as well. As you go through the application form, you can refer to the specific criteria within the guidelines. And we also used the application form, the updated form, to include additional information that we wanted to seek from applicants to increase clarity in reviewing their program, their project plan. And an example of this is that in the past we've had proposals that it was still a little bit unclear if it was part of their part of a PhD or part of a larger program of research. So I'll show you an example of this as we step through the key changes. So the IOPTP Research Grant Application Guidelines are comprised of the following key sections. So we outline the purpose, the eligibility for those who can actually apply, an overview of the application process and associated timeline. We want to be really transparent about that evaluation criteria, so what the reviewers will be looking for when they actually are reviewing each of the sections. And then that last section within the application guidelines is actually stepping that detailed information that is provided about what to include in each section. So the purpose of the IOPTP Research Grant is to fund the most relevant and feasible projects that benefit the paediatric physiotherapy profession and promote safe and effective outcomes for children and their families in accordance and alignment with the IOPTP strategic and operational plan. So before proceeding with applying for the IOPTP Research Grant, it's really important that you check that you are actually eligible to apply. So firstly, the applicant must be a member of an IOPTP member organisation. You can check this on the IOPTP website in the About Us section. And to give you an example of what that means, I'm from Australia. So our member organisation is the Australian Physiotherapy Association, and the actual IOPTP member organisation is the National Paediatric Physiotherapy Group within the Australian Physiotherapy Association. So hopefully if you do check out that sort of that link that's included on the website, you'll be able to see if your country's listed there. So the second requirement is that you do need to meet the requirement for practice within your IOPTP member country. So another example is in Australia, I need to be registered with the governing organisation called AHPRA. So each country should have their relevant registration board. So the third I guess, point is that the applicant must demonstrate commitment to further the paediatric physiotherapy profession through either research, teaching or practice. And when, I guess, prior to submitting your application, you want to be able to make sure that it is actually addressing the purpose of the IOPTP Research Grant. So as we go through in a little bit more detail, you'll see that one of the sections actually asks you to explicitly link your research project and how it aligns to the IOPTP strategic and operational plan. Now, the final consideration, again, where relevant, is in relation to ethics. So we ask applicants to consider whether they will need to apply for ethics approval as part of their proposal, just so that they can factor this into the timeline for submission. So in relation to research funding priorities, so as I mentioned just before, applicants are required to outline the significance of their research project to paediatric physiotherapy in alignment with the strategic and operational plan. And any IOPTP research funding priorities will be clearly outlined in the grant call announcement. So just a note that from year to year, the research priorities for funding may change to align with either IOPTP or World Physiotherapy strategic initiatives and research priorities. So the following diagram provides an overview of the grant application process. So that first step is to, I can't emphasize it more, but to read through the application guidelines. So make sure you check that you are eligible and that you are aware of the submission deadline and understand what documents you'll need to submit as part of the application process. So the second step is to certainly work through the application form. And depending on your study design, you'll need to check whether, as I mentioned before, you'll need to apply for ethics. You'll also need to factor in the time required to have the application signed by the nominated person that will oversee the financial administration of the project. And finally, which you'll note that point within the blue box there on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll need to reach out to the president or chair of your IOPTP member organisation to source a letter from them confirming that you are in fact a member. So that third step is once you understand the components and the documents that you need to submit as part of the application process, you'll need to submit by that submission deadline. So we clearly outline a date and a time for you to provide and send those forms in. We've developed a research committee specific email address that you can use as a point of contact for any inquiries before the submission date, but all applications should be submitted to that email address, and we'll make that nice and clear in the application guidelines as well. So then once you've submitted all the hard work from yourself, has gone into the submission process, the next couple of steps will involve work on behalf of the research committee. And so your application will go through a scientific review process. And following this, you'll be notified of the outcome of the application, as well as being provided feedback. It will be collated through the review process, and you'll receive a summary, which we hope will be used to sort of guide the next steps, regardless of whether or not you're successful or whether you were unsuccessful. So we like to think that we're hopefully able to use it as a process to provide an opportunity to really let you know where your strengths lay within the research proposal, and some areas that could potentially strengthen your proposal moving forwards. So this is a summary of the timeline required after going through that process. So to date, the grant round has typically opened in January. We have had discussions, and we would love to open it a little bit earlier where possible, just to give you a good, I guess at the moment it's a couple of months between the opening of the round and the submission deadline. But what we will again emphasize at the end of the webinar is that to look out for that grant call and the avenues where we disseminate that information. But so at this stage it's January, but if we can, we'll open it. The earliest would be December, potentially mid-December. Now, in terms of when it closes, so traditionally it has closed, I guess, mid-March. Some years we have had an extension for that deadline, where we've talked as a committee and decided whether or not we would extend that deadline. But at this stage, again, it will be the 15th of March next year. In terms of the review process, it does typically take a couple of months, but by June you should have been notified of the outcome. And for the successful applicant or the grant recipient, you will be able to hopefully commence your project from the second half of the year. Now, this is now a summary of the key sections included within the application form. So again, I'm not sure how many of you may have seen the old application form. There's definitely an overlap of the key headings because of course they're usually the really important information required within any research proposal. However, we have added a few key sections which I'll talk through. So as we learned at the beginning of the webinar, we do have participants are varied, I guess, in their professional roles and at different stages of their research journey. It does seem that we've got more participants that are at their early stage or have had some experience. So hopefully I'll go through a bit of a snapshot of the key information to include in each section now. However, I hope we can, if you've got specific questions, we can hopefully answer those in a smaller group discussion or within that Q&A. So the first section relates to the project team and collaborators. So you will be required to complete the details for the main applicant. Just to note as well, we have had investigators before that have been recipients of the grant application. So if you have any questions in relation to this, you can always reach out to us via the email, but just be mindful that that it is a possibility to have primary investigators. Now, you'll also need to complete the details for your project team and potentially any collaborators if applicable, and that might be that if you're conducting research within a particular clinical facility, for example, or if there are any other research collaborators. You'll also need to provide the details for the person responsible for the financial administration of the project, as I mentioned before. So an example of this may be in a university. Often there's a research office and there'll be a contact person that you can seek guidance from in relation to this, because you need to also get their signature prior to submitting your application. Now, I mentioned before that we do want to, we have added a couple of new sections. One of the pieces of information that we wanted to find out from applicants as well was just to declare whether the project's already commenced or whether it's part of a larger, like a discrete phase as part of a larger project. So in relation to project background and aims, we ask that you provide a brief background and outline the purpose of your research, including research questions and aims and objectives. So I've outlined in a little bit more detail the specific things, or those really key things that we want you to think about in relation to background, the elements of the research question, and also differentiating between research aims and objectives. Within the guidelines, we've given you some guidance around, I guess, the maximum amount. Instead of a word count, we've given you, I guess, a page, maximum sort of page number. So for this particular section, it's approximate, or the maximum of 1.5 pages. Just remember that we also ask that you include your supporting references. In relation to project design and methodology, I think we are all very mindful that this is really, really important within any grant application to make sure that obviously we're creating robust and quality research projects. So again, as I mentioned, within the research guidelines, we step you through some really key information that we'd like you to include in each section. So within your project plan, we ask you to consider that study design. I'll share with you a little bit later on some of the designs that have been successful in previous submissions, because it is very varied in terms of whether or not you choose to do choose a qualitative method or more of a quantitative method. We also ask that you think about your study population, you define that population and consider articulate the eligibility criteria, and also outlining your recruitment methods. So still within project design and methodology, again, probably, and I'll talk to this a little bit later as well, in relation to data collection, really let us know in more detail about what data will be collected, particularly if it's in relation to outcome measures. Provide some information about their reliability and validity, and certainly the procedures of collecting data as well. And then it's also really important to have a very clear data analysis section to really let us know how you're going to analyse the data within your study. Now, I know within an ethics application, you may need to explain how you're going to manage data and store data. We have just added a little section that just asks you to briefly summarise this, just to make sure that you're thinking about that within your specific context. You can see here, there's just a little summary there around approximately 3 pages is the maximum for this section. Now, in relation to providing a timeline, so there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. I've given you an example here of using a Gantt chart, but we do ask that you provide a timeline of the key milestones of your project, including the planned start of the research project and number of months required to complete the research project. There is the ability, you'll find in the application form, there is this template available, which of course you can individualise to your own needs. Otherwise, you can use something like it. There's the availability too, but we provide this as a bit of an example the type of information that we would like in relation to your timeline. So as I mentioned before, we do one of the sections, it's you can see there about approximately half a page. We ask you to clearly define the possible impacts of the study. So thinking about children, the impact on children and families and or paediatric physiotherapy practice. And then in contrast to previous years, we're actually explicitly asking you to briefly describe how your project aligns to the IOPTP strategic and operational plan. And research funding priorities when they've actually been articulated. So I've popped sort of where applicable there. Now, in terms of feasibility of the research project, also a really important consideration. So it is included as another key heading. So this certainly we can, as reviewers, we can look at this in the context of certainly the timeline that you've articulated. Can your project be completed within a realistic timeframe? However, this section also involves you providing an overview of the research capability of your team, of the research team that your project team that you've articulated in that sort of first page of the application, and how that collective, I guess, expertise will enable the research to be undertaken. Now, because we really want to support those who are new to research or have only got a little bit of research, we ask you just to consider, we want to encourage you to still be applying for the grant, but we ask you to consider who will be your research mentor within that project team. So we just want you to provide, have a think about that and articulate that in this section of the application form. And for those who may have actually already collected or done some preliminary work and have some pilot data, this is the section where you can also share that you have already conducted a pilot, might have already been sort of a pilot RCT, and you're going to use that to inform a larger project or going on to do a full RCT. So in relation to, this is actually another new sort of section because within the IOPTP, we really want to support and help you grow as not only as a clinician, educator, or researcher. So this particular question asks you to describe how completing this research project is going to help you advance your career within the field of paediatric physiotherapy. Now, another key important part of any research proposal is in relation to the budget. So again, we provide just a template of the information that we would really like you to include. So you'll be required to complete the study budget, providing details of what funds, how the funds will be used. To give you an example, previous grant rounds have been to the amount of US $7,000. Certainly from year to year, we will let you know the number, I guess, the amount, and also the number of grant applications that will be awarded. So that's something that when we make the call and provide the documents, something to look out for. So the other thing that we've added to the budget section is to ask applicants to actually provide justification for what they're requesting. So you'll note that there is a little section for you to actually say the need to justify that need and cost for the items requested. So you'll see in that little box in blue, as general guidance, grant funding would be used to pay for research-related services. So, for example, to transcribe interviews, to consult with someone that has more experience with statistics, for example, or it might relate to other material or personnel costs. All right, so the next section just talks a little bit about the review process. So we've gone through the bulk of the work that the applicant needs to do. And so we wanted to use this opportunity to also share with you some updates that we have made to the review process, but also provide a little bit of feedback from that we've collated from reviewers over the last few years of administering the grant. So Stacey has been instrumental in updating the review process. So I'll certainly ask for Stacey to sort of feel free to talk and add any additional information as I go through this process. But essentially, we've got all applications will be evaluated on 4 key criteria. You'll see the alignment with this criteria with the different sections within the application form. So that first criteria, which I think all of us can agree that certainly that significance of your research proposal to paediatric physiotherapy and alignment to the IOPTP strategic and operational plan is a very important element. Project design and methodology, feasibility of the project, and we'll also consider the information that you provided around the future research plan and career impact. And so reviewers will score each of these criterion and provide feedback on those particular sections. So in terms of the process, so a scientific review subcommittee, will be formed from the larger IOPTP Research Committee to assess the grant applications. So prior to reviewing the grant applications, subcommittee members obviously will receive information on the review process so that everyone is obviously in agreement with how applications will be evaluated. And so each grant should be reviewed by at least 3 reviewers. And the reviewers will score each section of the grant and ensure that the requirements are met. And obviously in relation to, as I mentioned, that evaluation criteria before, the impact on paediatric physiotherapy practice and I guess the rigour of your project methodology are going to be really, really key. So then a final meeting will be held where all reviewers will meet to review the scores of the proposal, and that full committee will vote on the proposal. So we hope and we want to share with you through this process that it will ensure transparency and rigour of the review process, which is really important because you've spent your time preparing your applications, and it's important that you know that that we're taking a lot of time to review and provide feedback on that application form. Stacey, did you want to add anything to this in particular?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that you covered all the steps that we'll go through, and we'll take questions later on if people have them.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And so now just a little bit of a summary of the, I guess, the feedback that we've received from reviewers on previous grant rounds. So we've divided this into sort of strengths of applications and then probably some of the common pitfalls as well that we've seen. And it's always, again, nice to use this opportunity to sort of share these lessons learnt and to help guide, I guess, future applicants around what has been successful in the past, but also bear in mind that through this updated process of the grant, we hope that we are also setting you up for success as well with the way in which we've written up the guidelines to provide that little bit more guidance. So in relation to the strengths, the collective sort of strengths of the applications or of those successful recipients, they've provided clear research questions, aims and objectives. They've provided really comprehensive project methodology. So you saw before I had some really key information associated with each of those key sections around the project methodology. So when reading through the application, we can see that when we're not left feeling like we're asking, oh, they haven't provided this information, or they've provided the detail that we're looking for. Another point is that we have had a number of PhD candidates successful in their submission of their grant. And so a key strength within their submission was that as part of their PhD, they actually provided a really clear explanation of how the specific project that they were undertaking, how it related to their larger program of research. So it was very specific and discrete. It wasn't providing us with an overview of their whole program, and the request for funding wasn't for their whole PhD of candidature, their larger program of research, if that makes sense. And then I think across all applications, I would say that a key strength has been the ability to summarise the relevance of the research to paediatric physiotherapy practice. So, and as I mentioned, that's through all applications, even those that may have been unsuccessful. So I think we are a passionate, I usually say bunch, it's very a colloquial way of saying we obviously, as a collective, paediatric clinicians, researchers, academics, we're passionate about the work that we do. So I think it's quite easy for us to articulate the importance of the work that the projects that we're doing on the topic. So now, in relation to common pitfalls, they in a sense the opposite of what I've articulated with the strengths, but in relation to feasibility, often it's just that the scope of the project was just too large to implement within the outlined time frame. So that was something that we just, and hopefully in the new application process, by asking you to really articulate that timeline and declare whether or not the project is part of a larger body of work, that will help to sort of keep the size and the scope of your research proposal to be a bit smaller. In relation to the project methodology, it was probably just often that there was just insufficient detail. So common areas were within recruitment, comprehensive information about the intervention, often was left feeling like I'm not actually sure what the intervention will be. I would really love to know a little bit more detail. The data collection methods and the statistical analysis. So they were sort of some common areas where more information was really required to make it just that more robust design. In relation to budget, there was unfortunately just minimal justification of how the funds would be used. And part of that might have also tied in with that they weren't explicitly, applicants have not been explicitly asked to provide justification. They just had to complete a template, a little table with the figures, but really important to know where the funds are going so that we know what the grant funding is going towards. And another little tip is just to check that those calculations, that especially those totals, have been calculated appropriately. And then probably the final point was in relation to just sometimes it was unclear whether or not the project had already started. So that's where we've asked now in that first page of the application form for applicants to declare whether or not the project has already started. So we so we know where they're up to with that. Now, before moving forward, I just thought I'd ask our other panel members if they wanted to add anything, having all participated in the review process in the past.
I would just echo what you had said about starting early, paying attention to the details, and maybe adding in having someone else from the outside review before you send it in, so that you are sure that what is clear to you is clear to others as well.
Yeah, really, really good points. Yeah, I think that, and we'll talk a little bit more in as we open the floor to discussion, but it is, yeah, I think you summarized that beautifully. All right.
I think the one other
So,
thing I would just add is
sorry.
if for
Oh,
people
yes,
who
yes,
are
yes, sorry.
for those who are in training, making sure that your mentoring team has signed off on what you're submitting as your grant proposal, because there's nothing worse than getting a grant funded and having your committee say that science doesn't meet our standards. And so then your grant is in conflict with what your dissertation needs to look like. So make sure your committee is signed off on your information.
Yes, that's a really, really good point, I think, because what's important, and actually that is, thank you for raising that, Stacey, because we have added on, again, that first page of the application form, you have to tick that all of your project team members have are aware that they're part of the project team and that they've read the application. So because that's obviously really, really important, that we want to make sure that you haven't spent all this time preparing a proposal that may not be supported as you go further down the line. So thank you for that feedback.
And
now,
before we move on, Karen shared in the chat a link to the Tidier checklist, which could be helpful or useful if you are describing an intervention, so that you cover all the parts that is needed to be able to do your
wonderful
intervention.
That's a really good point, actually, because I was going to say there are wonderful resources out there that do and I haven't got sorry, I'm turning to look at a different screen, but I'll have to have a little look at that one. But I think that raises a really good point in terms of drawing on some of those resources available to you that do provide really concrete guidance about either the reporting that's required, if you do go on to obviously either write up a protocol or publish. And I think that's probably, you said, which, I'll just have a quick look in the chat.
It's the Tidier checklist.
Oh, the Equator one. Wonderful. Yes. Excellent. The Tidier. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Karen. All right. So now this last section before we get into a little bit more open discussion is just about giving you some information regarding previous IOPTP Research Grant recipients. So we wanted to use this opportunity to share with you their achievements, and we hope that it will give you an idea of the types of project topics and designs that have been successful in the past, as well as share with you the impact the projects have had on paediatric physiotherapy practice through dissemination of their findings. So in terms of, I mentioned before, the amount of funding available in the past has been approximately $7,000 US dollars. So in terms of the three key areas of information I wanted to sort of share in relation to sort of paediatric topics, we didn't have certainly defined research funding priorities for previous rounds. So they have been quite diverse around the topics that have been awarded. But as I mentioned before, moving forwards, we may have more concrete guidelines around where those funding priorities lie. But to date, we've had successful recipients have their topics have included often intervention studies with specific paediatric conditions. So I think that our 2024 round winners were intervention studies with children with cerebral palsy, and our last year's recipient, this year's, I should say, 2020, the 2025 grant recipient was looking at children with ASD and physical activity and physical fitness. But we've also, in alignment with those IOPTP key priorities, we've had some really valuable studies around paediatric physiotherapy practice, gaining an understanding of, practice around the globe, as well as entry-level curriculum. And then another topic was around family-centred care. So through those topics, the study designs have been diverse. So in relation to the intervention studies, obviously there have been more those quantitative designs. And as you'll note, more sort of pilot studies. We did have one RCT that has been successful, a study that has been successful, and that's because it was informed by some a pilot study. So they had some initial data to be able to sort of scale up and articulate. But in terms of in relation to the qualitative designs, so the paediatric physiotherapy entry-level curriculum was a Delphi study that was conducted, so a 4-round Delphi study. So it was obviously very comprehensive. And then the family-centred care study was in relation to semi-structured interviews. And then paediatric physiotherapy practice was gleaned through a survey and some more of a mixed methods approach. In terms of the recipient background, we've had, as mentioned before, we've got a number of roles that people have within the audience. So we've had successful recipients from all of those areas. So we've had clinician researchers, we've had PhD candidates, and then those who are sort of more early and mid-career researchers as well. So it gives you a really nice idea of the diversity of options. I won't go into detail, but this is just an overview of to date our previous IOPTP Research Grant recipients. I mentioned before that there have been those first 2 projects. We had 2 co-primary investigators involved. And then you'll note in 2024, we did have 2 recipients for that particular year. So again, just with each grant call, we do make it really clear how many awards will be provided. Now, obviously, we're proud of what our research grant recipients have accomplished, and thus we like to share the findings of their work through a number of avenues, so including the IOPTP website and Facebook page, and also through the IOPTP newsletter. So an example that we've done the last 2 years is that we've asked the awardees to provide a 5-minute video summarising their research project, and that's been sort of in the beginning of basically at the beginning of their research project. So, and we place that up on the research funding page on the IOPTP website. And it's a really nice way of raising awareness of the work that's going to be done. And then we have, in the last edition of the IOPTP newsletter, we had a featured section on research updates for those further down the process of their projects, where we've asked them to sort of provide an update on where things are up to with their project. Now, in relation to publications and conferences, we've also had previous recipients present their research at conferences and published in peer-reviewed journals. So just briefly, I'll show you just some examples of specific cases. So you can see here that 2 of our recipients have published in Paediatric Physical Therapy and Disabilities Journal. Dr. Nikki Milne presented her findings from the Delphi study just recently at an Australian National Physiotherapy Conference. And we've also got an example there of Liz, who received the 2023 award. She's sort of an example of the information provided in the newsletter. I mentioned before the 5-minute videos that have been submitted as well. This is just an example of the landing page from the IOPTP website, where you can click on the video and have a look at the work that's being done. And I think it's really nice for those of you who are considering applying, because it means that you can see what, again, in a little bit more detail about the sort of scope of the projects that have been successful in the past, and also to inspire you a little bit about, some of your own thoughts moving forward. And this was the little 5-minute video from Yen Su Wu, who was actually our 2025 grant recipient. All right, so we've just got a little bit of time now before we break out for some discussion to share with you a video from a previous IOPTP Research Grant, Liz Carrington, I mentioned before. So she has provided a little bit of a video about her experience applying, and also giving you some, I guess, practical tips for to consider when applying. So I'll start the video now, but please let me know if you have any issues hearing.
My name is Liz Carrington. I'm from the University of Otago School of Physiotherapy here in New Zealand. I'm a senior lecturer and also a PhD candidate. I'm in the final stages now, and I'm hoping to hand my thesis in early next year. I was a grateful recipient of a previous IOPTP Research Grant, and I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about my experience applying for the grant, what went well, what I learnt along the way, and how the support has helped shape my research and professional growth. So to start with, my research focuses on paediatric physiotherapy. That's where my background lies and part of what I teach here at the school. In particular, my research looks at how young disabled people and their families experience healthcare services and therapy. I'm particularly interested in family-centred care, supported self-management, and the use of play as a therapeutic tool. As you can see here, my PhD research program consists of a number of steps and studies. The IOPTP grant that I received helped to fund this part here, so a year-long qualitative study in which I talked to disabled youth and their families. And this study built on earlier reviews and interviews with service providers, and ultimately helped me to co-design a family-centred intervention and create a digital app prototype for that intervention. So when applying for the grant, when I applied, I really wanted my reviewers to see that this project with youths and families wasn't a standalone idea, that it was the next logical and achievable step in an ongoing research program. To make this really clear, I included a schematic, as you can see here, outlining the phases of my research, with the current project, or the one I was asking for funding with, highlighted in red. Using this schematic helped my reviewers to see where the project sat in that kind of broader pathway. They could see that the project was realistic in scope, that the outcomes were both meaningful and feasible within that grant scope as well. Also, in preparing my application, I made sure to connect directly with the IOPTP's values. To do this, I reviewed the website, I had a really good read of the mission statement, and I made a point of stating within the application how my project was going to align with the IOPTP goals. So my top tips that I can share, the first is to start with a strong research question. Make sure that your question is really clearly defined, it's grounded in evidence, and feasible to answer within the scope of the grant. I think that having that really clear question allows you to have a good, clear focus and direction that can come across in your application. The next tip is to show that bigger picture, like I've said. If your project links to an existing research program, then it would be really good to state that, or maybe it sits within your clinical experience. So just make sure that you can outline these things so that your reviewers can see that kind of logical pathway and progression within the bigger picture. The next tip would be to keep it achievable. Try to be really realistic about your methods, the timelines, the deliverables, and don't be scared to start small. Sometimes a focused, well-timed study is just a bit more compelling than an over-ambitious one. My next tip would be to try to answer the so what question. So just try to be really clear about why your project matters. Think about how it's going to fill the gap in the literature. You've got to show that this is a topic that is really worth funding and worth getting in behind. Try to show how your project will try to advance paediatric physiotherapy practice and align with those IOPTP values. I also suggest that it's a good idea to involve strong collaborators early if you can. When I was writing my project, I had some really invaluable guidance from my PhD supervisors, which I think really helped to strengthen my proposal. And then, as I've already said, just including a simple diagram or a figure, just being able to show where your project fits in that wider research program can make a big difference. Okay, so some lessons I've learned. I think looking back, what I would say is important is to really build in more time than you expect for things like ethics approval, administration steps, things like letters of support, creating budgets and researching travel plans can just take longer than you think. In my case, I decided to work to 2 deadlines, so I gave myself a personal deadline to submit my application about a week before the IOPTP deadline actually closed, and I began all my administrative tasks about 3 weeks prior to that and had sort of an internal deadline of about a month before the end of the grant application deadline came about. So the impact of the grant. Well, the impact of the grant for me has really been quite massive. It's made a huge difference in my research and in my professional growth. In terms of the research, the grant really allowed me to conduct those in-depth interviews. I was able to travel from the top of the North Island in New Zealand to the bottom of the South Island and speak with families like all the way across the country, which was really special. And it really helped me to add these families' lived experiences and their voices to my findings. I've found that opportunity to spend face-to-face contact with these families was really important. I wouldn't have been able to do that without the funding, and it's actually led to some really beautiful ongoing relationships and has actually set the scene for me to continue to co-design services with these families going forward. So it's actually having a really ongoing, lasting impact. I also, one of the other impacts was that I was able to I had a publication from some of the findings recently, just this year, and I do have another manuscript that's ready to go, so I'm going to be hoping to submit that because I'd really like to have an article just focused on the families' experiences themselves. On a personal level, it's been really rewarding. I have grown as an independent researcher, and I was really fortunate to be able to travel to Tokyo earlier in the year to the World Congress of Physiotherapy to present some of the findings from my IOPTP funded study. So this is the IOPTP networking group here, and so I was really lucky to be able to connect with my international colleagues who all share that same commitment to inclusive, family-centered practice, which was really special. So just in closing, this IOPTP grant has really been an amazing experience. I'm super grateful, and I'm really grateful for the IOPTP supporting this important work for going forward. I encourage everyone to give it a go, pop your application in, connect with other people and get some feedback on your proposals. And just a great big thank you to the IOPTP and of course to all the young people and families who were generously shared their stories with me.
All right. So very appreciative. Unfortunately, Liz couldn't join us live today, but we're very appreciative of her sharing that information with us via video. So a big shout out to Liz for her contribution. Now I'm going to hand over to Keen. I'll be guided. You just let me know in terms of flicking forward the slides.
You can stop share.
Stop sharing?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. There we go.
So thank you, Kirsty, and thank you, Liz. I hope that Liz's experience and top tips inspired you for thinking about your grant. And due to time, we will move straight into a more general discussion among us and also the Q&A. So I will post some reflection questions in the chat to think about. But if there are any questions now among you, please feel free to write your question in the chat or raise your hand if you have any. Yes, Dorothy, thank you.
Thank you so much for the comprehensive presentation concerning the grants. And then the awardee also made things very clear. Thank you so much. I just have a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether I missed it. Do you always have, does IOPTP always have just one slot for the grants? Or are there two slots? Or is it does it vary every year? That's number one.
Yes.
Secondly, do you have, or everyone has to compete for the same grants? Yes. Thirdly, for application for the grant. And
sorry,
then
Dorothy,
yes.
You disappeared on your last question. Can you please repeat it again? Your question number 3.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. My third question was whether them, or it has to be primary research that's going to the field. And that's the fourth question. Do you
Dorothy, can you hear me?
mean you particular application, but you think, or probably the researcher could do with guidance, either from IOPTP or from and then that's also would feed into another question that's what is on whether an individual can apply for the grant or it could be more than one individual.
Okay.
And
Dorothy?
I think yes.
Yes, I think we can start. I'm losing connection. So I think we can start answering some of your questions so that we remember them, and then we can you can fill us in with the one we did not hear. Your first question was about how many slots there are every year.
Yes.
Yes, it has been one slot per year until now. There was 1 year with 2, but that was due to COVID when we didn't have any openings, so we had funding for another grant. But it depends a little bit also about the IOPTP budget. But it has been 1 per year. And if I understood your second question correctly, it's about the competition. You all compete for the same grant. So it's yeah, so that's how it is. And now you other can help me remembering the questions. The third was about
whether you assess reviews, scoping reviews, systematic reviews.
Kirsty. Do you have
I
a
was just
question?
thinking about whether or not it had to be primary research. Look, to be honest, we haven't had any, I don't think we've actually had any submissions that have been specifically for a systematic review. Previously, they've all been for original research projects. Karen, I don't know if you can talk to prior to the recipients that I had listed in your experience.
In my experience, I would say no, we have not had a solely literature synthesis submission. Often, and I think of, for example, Nikki's project, where there was a knowledge synthesis ahead of the Delphi that she did. Similarly, for Chantal's, where there was a knowledge synthesis, but then there was also surveys, and I believe around a survey. So that's what I would say I've seen, and you guys have been there pretty well at the very beginning, because the reality is this doesn't have a long, we've been doing this for not that long, i.e. not 10 years, but within the 10-year mark. So just to give people a bit of an idea, we have different processes or different methodologies coming up every year, I would say.
Yeah, and we haven't stated that it has to be a primary research, but you have to be able to have have your arguments for the budget, like what you will spend the money from the grant on. So I think that's the major consideration. Okay, and then we had, if you can be more than one applicant, that's possible. And if you had more questions, can you please write them in the chat, or maybe try again now?
Okay, and if you receive, thank you so much for the responses. If you receive a grant, are you eligible for another one? And the other one is, does IOPTP have topics or particular areas, as in, yes, that they've seen that there's a need for research that they propose or they give out for applicants to compete on, something like that?
We haven't had the same recipient receive the grant more than once, because as Karen said, we only have it for a decade soon. So we haven't really been in that position yet that we have had the same applicant applying twice. And regarding the focus on the calls, until now we have had open calls, but we are in the process of guiding them more towards the WPT's focus areas, and also the survey that were sent out earlier this year. But maybe Karen or Kirsty could fill in here. Karen, please go ahead. You know this part better than me.
So what I would say with regards to a second grant, we would potentially consider it, but I'd be honest, Dorothy, what we hope the IOPTP grant will do is to potentially provide the opportunity to get data to be able to apply for a bigger grant in a different area. So almost like a stepping stone grant is sort of how the executive pictures it. So, which is, I think, why we've added, how is this going to advance your career? So those pieces. So that's what my honest answer would be around a second grant. With regards to priorities, so what I would say is, as we've worked with a more diligent and transparent strategic plan and operational plan, we will be looking at more specific topics potentially to guide the call, or provide feedback with regards to some of the topics we'll be looking for. The other thing, which we don't have yet, but will be released as far as we've been informed, is that WPT, as some of you already know, have been in a research priority setting exercise, of which they will be revealing what those priorities are in the early new year. So they will not apply to this year, 2026's call, because we won't have them in time. But in the future, they will be applying to the call, so probably first 2027. So we are meeting as an executive at the end of November, so November 29th exactly. So we'll be discussing if there are any priorities related to some of the other areas of the strategic plan, example, mentorship, and these are just examples we haven't agreed, but we may have some key priorities going into that call, which will be in the call when we make the call in December or January. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
And then I think you had the last question before we let Lisa ask a question about mentoring. And we have not at this moment been providing mentoring within the IOPTP, but that's something we are looking into and working on for the coming year.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorothy. And then Lisa.
Yes, hi, good afternoon from Belgium. Thank you very much for organizing this webinar live today. Happy to join it. I just have some practical tips. The first one is that I learned that you could apply as a team or with co-investigators, but those co-investigators also need to be a member of the National Pediatric Physiotherapy Organization. And if they're not or can they also not be pediatric physiotherapists or a medical doctor or occupational therapists? That's my first question.
Yes, thank you for that. As an applicant, you need to be a member of the IOPTP or a member organization, but you are allowed to have a team that are not all members. So it depends on and how, if you are funded, how you divide your funds. That's you have to argue it in your budget, but you need to be a member to be the main applicant.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And then my second and last question was, when do you consider someone as having enough research experience? Because I learned that you, if you're a very early researcher, that you would need to have a letter from a more experienced researcher as a mentoring or supervising person. So is there a specific cutoff, or is it something that you would decide also upon yourself?
Thanks for the question, Lisa. I'll just jump in there now just to elaborate a little bit more on what I mentioned in it's the section of the feasibility of the project, and we ask you to talk about the research capability of your team. And we've just asked, you don't need to necessarily have a letter specifically. It's just to sort of consider, if you are in the early stages of your research journey, who within your research project team would be a more senior researcher that will help guide you through some of the steps that you might not be familiar with. That will help us, or those of us who are reviewing the application, know that even though you might be the main applicant with less research experience, that someone on your team is going to help guide you through the process and be able to fulfill the proposal that you set out.
Okay, thank you. That's my questions.
I will also jump in. I think what has been our major consideration over the years is the feasibility of the study, not as much on the experience of the researcher, but how feasible is this study given your experience.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Are there any other questions in the room or in the space? And feel free to write them in the chat. Stacey have shared a strategic and operational plan, link to that in the chat. Thank you. Okay. Do any of our other panelists have anything to add or yeah?
Yeah, I think one of the things that would be nice to maybe for people to think about is, again, where you are kind of career stage wise and what you need from a mentoring standpoint. Um, and being able to reach out to other people. I think the idea of you don't have to, everybody on your team doesn't have to be a therapist. Everybody brings different things to the team. And so the goal really in the application is that you articulate that, just to not leave the review committee to guess. Why is this person on the committee, or does this person have the knowledge base? I think you can defend almost anything as long as you defend it. We don't want to try and guess it. So as long as somebody could read your application and understand what is each person's role on the team, and what do they bring to the table. So they may bring mentoring and statistics for you, or that you're a PhD candidate and that your team has supported kind of this is the protocol that you're going to use. I think oftentimes that's a place that people get into trouble, is that they just list people and assume that everyone will figure out what their role is. So I think for me, that's one of the big guiding things I would look at if you're going to include more people than just you on the grant, is to defend that team and how they're going to help you answer the primary research question. So if you can keep that kind of in mind as you write, I think it'll help you really prepare an application that other people can read easily and understand the role of the team.
Thank you. Very important point, Stacey. And very good. I think in general, it's very good to be explicit because we don't know that much about the project. So don't make us guess. Kimberly, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's what I was going to say about all the components.
Okay.
I think that's a great thing that Stacey brought up, is all the components. You're the expert on this, or you're the one that's thought of these things. So making sure that you explain it without assuming that we know what you're talking about is kind of important, although you have to stay within the guidelines of how long it can be, but being concise and specific to what you're trying to tell us would be great.
Thank you, Kimberly. Okay, 1.5 hours flies by. We're getting close to our session. And I would like to thank everybody for their questions. And if you have any questions later, please reach out. And maybe, Kirsty, you can share the...
I'll share, yeah. I'll just share again our...
You can start with the closing remarks as well.
Yeah, I'll just share this one here. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So if you'd like to read more about the grant, please check out the IOPTP webpage, and Kirsty showed you that they're on the research or on the resources. And just a note, we will update the text until the call. So please be mindful of that, since you are still in the revision phase. But we aim to open the next call in mid-December or early January. And then we will share the announcement on the IOPTP web page. We will email, or Karen will email the other IOPTP member organizations. And please check out our IOPTP social media, the Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, if you are on any of those. And please feel free to reach out for any questions. And then you can take the next slide, Kirsty. You also Kirsty shared the more general email that I can't remember now. Kirsty, what is that for the grant?
Yes, it's back on the little, if you are watching this back, it's the research, the IOPTP, research at IOPTP research. So
yes,
it's also listed on the current research funding page as well.
Yes, so there you can always reach out, then it will end up to us anyway, or you can reach out to us individually on these emails. Please share this information to any colleagues that are interested, although you can be competitors in the grant, but we're happy to share them, and we really would like this information to reach as many members as possible. But there are also, our organizations are very different, and we have different way of reaching out. So please share this in your networks so that we can have more spread across the world. So keep your eyes out for the announcement. And as we said, please feel free to reach out with any questions. And I'm always happy to help you. And I think now it's Carissa want to say something.
Yes, please. Yeah. Kirsty, do you mind going to the slide with the QR code?
Sure. Sorry, I'll just actually I'll stop share and then I'll go back to it so that you don't have to slide through. Beginning. Okay, let me share this one again with you.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you so much to our speakers, lead speakers, Dr. Johansson and Dr. McDonald for their excellent presentation and their colleagues that joined us, and all of you for joining us today for the 12th IOPTP webinar. A couple quick reminders before we sign off is that if you haven't already done so, please use the, I'm putting a link in the chat right now, or you can scan the QR code shown on the slide now. This form is how we'll verify your participation and send your certificate of attendance. Also, today's webinar has been recorded. The recording will be posted on our website and YouTube channel in the coming days. Please feel free to share the link with colleagues who might benefit from this content. And so on behalf of the IOPTP and the entire webinar planning team, thank you for attending and for your continued engagement in our webinars. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.